They are born, they gradually get older, and then they divide. And when they divide, they produce two newly born cells. So this is really a cycle, and it's called the cell cycle. That's the period of time between the birth of a cell and its subsequent division from 1 to 2. And the events that are important for that have been gradually described over the years. The first event, of course, was the process of cell division itself, and all the complicated changes that occur with the chromosomes during mitosis, and that was in the end of the 19th century. Particularly Fleming was important in describing those. It took quite a long period of time before the next major event was discovered that's common to all cell cycles, and that is the time when the DNA, which makes up those chromosomes, is actually made. What we now know is, of course, those chromosomes are the elements of heredity, and the molecule of heredity is in fact DNA. I'm pleased to say that that was actually discovered in this very institution with Avery, MacLeod and McCarty, who in 1944 discovered DNA as the hereditary material. But then a few years later, it took, of course, Francis Crick and Jim Watson, working with the X-ray crystallographic data from Franklin and from Wilkins, to establish that the structure of DNA was this famous double helix. And that double helix, which we can sort of imagine as like a sort of ladder with two sides of the ladder connected by rungs, is of course the basic element of all chromosomes. And in a chromosome, there will be one such ladder at the beginning of the cycle, and then that ladder separates and you make a complementary copy during the process that's known as DNA replication. And that occurs in a period of the cycle called S phase, S standing for synthesis of DNA. And then those replicated DNA molecules are separated apart during mitosis at the end of the cell cycle, which is known as M phase. So these are the basic elements of the cell cycle, S and M, and then there are gaps between those events, and the first gap between cell division and S phase is called G1, gap 1, and the second phase between S phase and mitosis, or M phase, is called G2 for the gap 2. And that's really the basic elements of the cell cycle. What's happened in the last 10 or 20 years in the cell cycle is that the basic engine of the cell cycle has been discovered. That is, those molecules which actually promote S phase and promote mitosis. And these were discovered working with different organisms, mainly with yeast and also with frogs. And what turned out to be really quite surprising at the time, maybe less so now, is that really the same molecules were controlling progression through the cell cycle in yeasts, the simplest, or amongst the simplest of living things, as was controlling it also in human beings and everything in between, including frogs and flies and worms and so on, and also plants. So this basic engine was highly conserved. It was something that was invented many millions of years ago, probably 1,500 million years ago, as a control system that controls progression through the cell cycle. And this sort of universal mechanism was something that was, I think, quite an important chapter in the idea of the cell and how cells reproduce. So what is there yet to be found out about the cell cycle? Well, although we know the engine room, the basic engine that drives the events, the main events of S phase and mitosis, we still are very sketchy on the details by which DNA replication, that's the main aspect of S phase, actually is carried out, and how the elaborate choreography of mitosis, all those chromosome movements and so on, and how they're carried out. And there's a lot of molecular detail that needs to be put in place underneath the engine that is, I think, now a major focus, in fact, of research. There are other components that have to be made and properly separated as well. Organelles, like the mitochondria, for example, the Golgi apparatus, and other components within the cell that must be properly divided when a cell undergoes division. And we don't have such a clear idea about how those things happen either, and I think that is also another important aspect of cell cycle and its research. And a final one, which I think is probably very key, is the relationship of the cell cycle and development. Because we know when we make a living thing, like me, I have cells dividing in my nose to make a nose. And that means the cell cycle must be regulated developmentally to produce different shaped organs and tissues. And when those processes go wrong, of course, cell division goes out of control, and then you can get cancers. That is, a mass of cells growing in the wrong place at the wrong time. And that is, of course, an exceedingly important medical problem. So there's still quite a few things to be found out about the cell cycle, which are both important for the basic biology and also for medicine.